The research station Kepler 442b hummed with activity as alien scientists from the Zephyrian Empire conducted their final experiments on the primitive species they had discovered. Dr. Vexithara, the lead xenobiologist, stared at the small human child sleeping in the containment pod. The boy, no more than 8 Earth years old, had been their test subject for 3 cycles now. The specimen shows remarkable adaptability, Vexithara noted to her assistant, Clickmore. Its brain patterns indicate an unusual capacity for learning and problem-solving. Much more advanced than we initially calculated. The child had been taken from a human settlement during one of their reconnaissance missions. The Zephyrians viewed humans as nothing more than another primitive species to catalog and study. They had no concept of the bonds that connected human families, nor did they care about the anguish they caused. "Sir, we're receiving urgent transmission from the High Command," announced Communications Officer Zelnok from across the laboratory. "All research stations are ordered to evacuate immediately. The Dragon armadas have been spotted moving through this sector." Vexithara's multiple eyes widened in terror. Dragons were the stuff of nightmares for most civilized species in the galaxy. Ancient, powerful, and utterly ruthless, they had destroyed entire star systems when provoked. No one knew what angered them or why they chose their targets, but when dragons appeared, wise species fled. "Impossible," Vexithara whispered. "This sector has been quiet for millennia. Why would they come here now?" "Unknown, sir. But the evacuation order is immediate. All personnel must report to transport ships within 1 standard hour." Panic erupted throughout the station. Scientists scrambled to secure their most valuable research data, while support staff prepared the evacuation vessels. In the chaos, the human child was forgotten. His containment pod sat in the corner of the laboratory, its occupant still sleeping peacefully, unaware that his captors were abandoning him. "What about the specimens?" Clickmore asked, gesturing toward the various containment units holding creatures from different worlds. "Leave them," Vexithara replied coldly. "We can find new test subjects later. Our lives are more important than some primitive animals." The evacuation proceeded with military efficiency. Transport ships launched from the station's docking bays one after another, each packed with terrified Zephyrian personnel. Within 45 minutes, the research station was completely abandoned except for the forgotten specimens and the sleeping human child. As the last transport ship disappeared into hyperspace, the child began to stir. His name was Marcus Chen, though the aliens had only referred to him as Specimen 247. He had been taken from his family's farm on New Terra Colony during what his parents thought was just another ordinary day. Now he was alone on an alien space station, millions of light years from home. Marcus rubbed his eyes and looked around the empty laboratory. The constant hum of alien voices was gone, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the station's life support systems. He had learned enough of the Zephyrian language during his captivity to understand basic concepts, and the absence of his captors filled him with both hope and fear. The containment pod's door had been left unsealed in the rush to evacuate. Marcus pushed it open and stepped out onto the cold metal floor. His bare feet made small slapping sounds as he walked across the laboratory, examining the abandoned equipment and empty workstations. "Hello?" he called out in English, then repeated it in broken Zephyrian. "Anyone there?" Only silence answered him. Marcus made his way to the observation deck where large transparisteel windows offered a view of space. The sight that greeted him was unlike anything he had ever seen. The void was filled with massive shapes moving with purpose and grace. They were enormous beyond comprehension, their scales reflecting starlight like living mountains drifting through the cosmos. Dragons. Even as a human child from a remote colony world, Marcus had heard stories about dragons. They were legends whispered in spaceports and trading stations, tales of ancient beings who commanded power beyond imagination. Most people believed they were myths, stories invented to frighten children or explain unexplained phenomena in deep space. But here they were, real and magnificent, approaching the research station with steady, measured movements. Marcus pressed his face against the window, watching in wonder rather than fear. He counted at least 20 of the creatures, each one larger than the biggest spaceship he had ever seen. The dragons moved in formation, their massive wings barely visible as they propelled themselves through the vacuum of space. Their scales seemed to absorb and reflect light in impossible ways, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly, but filled Marcus with a strange sense of comfort. As the closest dragon approached the station, Marcus could make out details that defied explanation. The creature's eyes glowed with an inner fire that seemed to burn with intelligence older than civilizations. Its massive head turned slowly, as if scanning the station with senses far beyond normal perception. Then, impossibly, those ancient eyes focused directly on the observation deck where Marcus stood. The dragon's gaze met his through the transparisteel, and Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. It was like having someone look directly into his soul, understanding everything about him in an instant. The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, almost like a curious gesture. Marcus raised his small hand and pressed it against the window. To his amazement, the dragon responded by extending one enormous claw and gently touching the outer surface of the observation deck, directly opposite Marcus's hand. The moment of contact sent vibrations through the station's hull, and Marcus felt something change deep inside himself. It was as if a door had been opened in his mind, allowing him to sense things he had never noticed before. He could feel the dragon's presence, ancient and powerful, but also somehow familiar and protective. Other dragons began to approach the station, surrounding it, but making no aggressive moves. Marcus realized they weren't here to destroy the research facility. They were here for something else entirely. They were here for him. As this understanding dawned on Marcus, he felt no fear. Instead, a sense of belonging filled his young heart. Whatever was about to happen, whatever these magnificent beings wanted with him, he knew his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The abandoned research station drifted silently through space, carrying its lone human occupant toward a destiny that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity's true place among the stars. The largest dragon, a magnificent creature with scales that shifted between deep emerald and starlight silver, moved closer to the station. Marcus watched in fascination as the being's massive form seemed to phase partially through the station's hull without causing any damage. Ancient dragon magic was beyond the understanding of most species, but Marcus felt an instinctive acceptance of what he was witnessing. The station's atmosphere suddenly filled with a warm, resonant sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't quite speech as humans understood it, but Marcus found he could comprehend the meaning behind the ancient words. "Young one," the voice resonated through his mind, "you have been touched by suffering, yet your spirit remains unbroken. This is the mark of true strength." Marcus pressed both hands against the observation window now, his heart racing with excitement rather than fear. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The dragon's massive eye regarded him with what seemed like ancient amusement. "We are the Eternal Watch, guardians of the balance between order and chaos. And you, small human, are far more important than those who held you captive could ever understand." Around the station, other dragons began to position themselves in a complex pattern. Marcus could see energy beginning to flow between them, creating lines of light that formed geometric shapes in the darkness of space. The research station was now at the center of what appeared to be a massive ritual circle. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice small but steady. "I'm just a kid from New Terra. My parents are farmers. There's nothing special about me." The great dragon's mental voice carried a warmth that reminded Marcus of his grandmother's bedtime stories. "Child of Earth's children, you carry within you the potential that has slumbered in your species since time immemorial." The Zephyrians saw only a primitive creature to be studied and discarded. They could not perceive the awakening that was beginning within you. Suddenly, the station shuddered as the dragon magic began to take effect. Marcus felt a tingling sensation throughout his entire body, as if every cell was being gently examined and somehow improved. He wasn't afraid. Instead, he felt more alive than he ever had before. "What's happening to me?" he asked, watching as his hands began to glow with a soft, warm light. "We are awakening what was always within you," the dragon explained. "Your species possesses a gift that even we, in all our ancient wisdom, find remarkable. You have the ability to adapt, to grow, to become more than you were. But most importantly, you have the capacity to form bonds that transcend the boundaries between species and worlds." The energy patterns around the station grew brighter, and Marcus began to see visions flashing through his mind. He saw glimpses of Earth's history, of humans spreading across the galaxy, of conflicts and discoveries that hadn't happened yet. But more than that, he saw connections, threads of understanding and cooperation linking different species in ways that seemed impossible. The galaxy is on the brink of change, the dragon continued. Ancient powers are stirring, and the younger species will need guidance to navigate what is coming. Your people, the humans, have a role to play that they do not yet understand. Marcus felt knowledge flowing into his mind, not overwhelming him but settling gently into his consciousness like seeds being planted in fertile soil. He learned about the true history of the galaxy, about civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humans had even discovered fire. He learned about the dragons themselves, being so old that they had witnessed the birth of stars and the death of entire galactic clusters. "Why me?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Because you were abandoned," the dragon replied with infinite gentleness. "Because you suffered and yet chose not to hate. Because when you saw us approaching, you felt wonder instead of fear. These qualities mark you as one who can bridge the gaps between species that others see as unbridgeable." The ritual reached its crescendo, and Marcus felt himself changing on a fundamental level. His human heritage remained intact, but it was enhanced, expanded in ways that would allow him to serve as a translator between different forms of consciousness. He could now sense the emotional resonances of other beings, understand their motivations and fears in a way that transcended language barriers. "The Zephyrians will return," the dragon warned. "They will discover what they abandoned here, and they will be afraid. Fear makes beings do terrible things, young one, but you will be ready for them." Marcus nodded, feeling older than his 8 years, but also more hopeful than he had been since his capture. "What do I need to do?" "First, you must learn. The station contains knowledge that the Zephyrians gathered from across the galaxy. Study it, understand it, make it your own. Then when the time comes, you must find others like yourself, humans who carry the same potential for growth and connection." The dragon magic began to fade, but the changes within Marcus remained. He could feel new senses awakening, new ways of perceiving the universe around him. The abandoned research station no longer felt like a prison. It had become a school, a place where he would prepare for a destiny he was only beginning to understand. "Will I see you again?" Marcus asked as the dragons began to pull back from the station. "When you have need of us, we will be there," the great dragon promised. "But know this, young guardian. The strength to shape the future lies within you and your kind. We can only guide and protect. The real work must be done by those who choose to build bridges instead of walls." The dragons began to disperse, their massive forms fading back into the cosmic void as mysteriously as they had appeared. Marcus remained at the observation window, watching until the last trace of their presence vanished among the stars. He was alone again, but he no longer felt abandoned. The station's systems hummed around him, and he could now understand their function with a clarity that hadn't existed before. Food dispensers, atmospheric controls, communication arrays, data storage units, all of it made sense to him now. Marcus turned away from the window and walked deeper into the station, ready to begin his education. The Zephyrians had intended to study him, but in their haste to escape, they had left behind something far more valuable than they could have imagined. A human child touched by dragon magic, preparing to change the course of galactic history. 3 months passed in solitude aboard the research station, but Marcus barely noticed the loneliness. His enhanced consciousness allowed him to absorb information at an incredible rate, and the Zephyrian databases contained treasures beyond imagination. He learned about stellar cartography, xenobiology, quantum mechanics, and diplomatic protocols used by dozens of different species. The dragon magic had not only enhanced his learning capacity, but had also awakened latent abilities that seemed to grow stronger each day. Marcus could now sense the emotional states of the various specimens the Zephyrians had left behind, and he had gradually released them from their containment units. The station had become a small sanctuary, where creatures from across the galaxy coexisted. Peacefully, a crystalline entity from the Andromeda Rim sang beautiful harmonies that helped Marcus focus. During his studies, a small furry creature from the Vega system had appointed itself his companion, following him everywhere with devoted loyalty. Most remarkably, a young telepathic being from Proxima Centauri had begun teaching Marcus how to project his thoughts across vast distances. It was during one of these Telepathic exercises that Marcus first sensed the approaching ships and something's coming, he told his telepathic friend, a blue-skinned humanoid named Zentar who communicated through pure thought. Multiple vessels moving fast. Zentar's large eyes grew wider with concern. I sense fear and anger from the approaching minds. They are not coming in peace. Marcus made his way to the station's command center, where his enhanced understanding of Zephyrian technology allowed him to access the sensor arrays. What he saw on the screens confirmed his worst fears. A Zephyrian military fleet was approaching, consisting of 12 warships and what appeared to be a mobile research facility. The communication array crackled to life with an incoming transmission. Marcus activated the receiver, and the stern face of Commander Thekval appeared on the screen. The Zephyrian officer's multiple eyes narrowed when he saw Marcus instead of the expected research staff. Primitive creature, Thekval hissed. You will return to your containment immediately. Our scientists require you for expanded testing protocols. Marcus straightened his shoulders, feeling the dragon-gifted confidence flowing through him. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm not your specimen anymore. You abandoned me here, remember? Thekval's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. The child was speaking perfect Zephyrian, and displaying a composure that no primitive species should possess. Impossible. Our scans from 3 cycles ago showed you were barely sentient. How are you accessing our communication systems? I learned, Marcus replied simply. I've learned a lot of things while you were gone. The Zephyrian commander's eyes darted to readings from his ship's sensors. Commander, his science officer reported, I'm detecting massive energy residue around the station. The quantum signature is unlike anything in our databases. Explain these readings, Thekval demanded, focusing his attention back on Marcus. Marcus smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both childlike and ancient. Some friends stopped by to visit. They taught me a few things about my potential. The implications hit Thekval like a physical blow. Only one force in the galaxy could leave energy signatures that mysterious and powerful. Dragons, he whispered, his multiple limbs trembling. The dragons were here. They were very disappointed in how you treated me, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. They had some interesting things to say about species that prey on children. Thekval's military training warred with his growing fear. Dragons were legendary for their protective instincts, especially regarding young beings who had been harmed by others. If they had indeed taken an interest in this human child, the Zephyrian Empire could face consequences beyond imagination. You're lying, Thekval said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dragons are myths, stories told to frighten younglings. Marcus gestured toward his telepathic friend who had joined him in the command center. Zentar here can verify everything I'm telling you. He was awake when they arrived. The blue-skinned being stepped forward and projected his thoughts directly to the Zephyrian ships. Every telepathically sensitive being in the fleet suddenly experienced vivid memories of the dragon encounter, shared through Zentar's consciousness. The images were undeniably real. Massive ancient beings surrounding the station, energy patterns that defied conventional physics, and most terrifying of all, the clear sense of protective interest they had shown toward the human child. Chaos erupted across the Zephyrian fleet as crew members reacted to the telepathic transmission. Several ships began powering down their weapon systems without orders, their crews too terrified to contemplate an attack on someone under dragon protection. Sir, the science officer reported in a shaking voice, quantum analysis confirms it. Dragons were definitely here. The energy patterns match theoretical models perfectly. Thekval found himself in an impossible situation. His orders were to retrieve the human specimen and expand the research program, but dragons had claimed the child as their own, and no sane being in the galaxy would knowingly provoke their anger. What do you want? He finally asked Marcus, the question heavy with defeat. Marcus had been preparing for this moment throughout his months of study. First, I want safe passage for all the beings you abandoned here. They're going home to their families. Agreed, Thekval replied quickly. Second, I want access to the Zephyrian communication networks. There are other humans in your research facilities, aren't there? Families who don't know what happened to their children? The commander's silence was answer enough. I thought so, Marcus continued. You're going to help me contact them. Every human being held by your empire is going home. The High Command will never agree to that, Thekval protested. The research programs are too valuable. Marcus's eyes began to glow with the soft light that had first appeared during the dragon ritual. "Commander, I suggest you explain to your high command exactly who is making this request. I think they'll find my terms very reasonable compared to the alternative." The implied threat was clear. If the Zephyrians refused to cooperate, they would face the wrath of beings who could obliterate their entire civilization without effort. "I'll need to consult with my superiors," Tekval said, his military bearing crumbling under the weight of cosmic politics far beyond his understanding. "You have 1 standard hour," Marcus replied. "After that, I'll assume you've chosen the difficult path, and I'll need to call for advice from my friends." As if summoned by his words, a brief shimmer appeared in the space around the station, a subtle reminder that ancient eyes were still watching. The Zephyrian sensors screamed warnings about unidentifiable energy sources, but the readings disappeared before they could be properly analyzed. Tekval's multiple faces went pale. "I'll contact High Command immediately." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus alone with his rescued companions in the command center. Centaur placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, projecting feelings of pride and support. "You did well, young one," the telepathic being communicated. "But this is only the beginning. The Zephyrians will comply, but there are other species in the galaxy who exploit the weak. Your path will be long and difficult." Marcus nodded, looking out at the stars through the command center's viewing port. Somewhere out there, other human children were being held against their will, and countless beings from other species were suffering similar fates. The dragons had awakened something within him, but the responsibility to act belonged to him alone. "Then we'd better get started," he said, his young voice carrying a determination that would soon echo across the galaxy. The Zephyrian High Command's response came within the hour, delivered by a trembling Tekval, whose career had just taken an unexpected turn toward cosmic diplomacy. The message was brief and to the point: full compliance with the human child's demands, immediate cessation of all research programs involving sentient beings, and the establishment of a new department dedicated to interspecies relations and conflict prevention. Marcus had won his first victory, but as he coordinated the return of captured beings to their homeworlds, he began to understand the true scope of the problem facing the galaxy. The Zephyrian databases revealed a network of research facilities, trading posts, and collection operations that spanned dozens of star systems. Humans weren't the only targets. Hundreds of species were being exploited by various galactic empires, who viewed less technologically advanced civilizations as resources to be harvested. The Korthak Syndicate operates 17 facilities in the outer spiral, Zentar reported, his telepathic abilities allowing him to process multiple data streams simultaneously. They specialize in psychological experimentation and behavioral modification. Current estimates suggest they're holding over 3,000 beings from 47 different species. Marcus felt a familiar burning sensation in his chest, the same feeling that had appeared when the dragons first touched his consciousness. It was anger, but not the destructive kind that led to vengeance. This was righteous fury tempered by purpose, the kind of emotion that built civilizations and toppled tyrannies. "What about the others?" he asked, reviewing the holographic displays that showed the galactic distribution of various criminal enterprises. "The Veltaran Empire has mining operations that use forced labor," his crystalline companion chimed in harmonious tones. "The Nexus Collective has been kidnapping young beings with psychic potential for their military programs. And there are at least 6 other major operations that we've identified so far." The scope of suffering was overwhelming, but Marcus refused to let despair take hold. The dragons had chosen him for a reason, and he was beginning to understand what that reason might be. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their physical capabilities. It was their ability to forge connections across seemingly impossible barriers. "We need allies," Marcus declared, studying the tactical displays with the strategic mind that had been awakened by ancient magic. "The Zephyrians will help because they're terrified. But fear isn't a sustainable foundation for cooperation. We need species who will join us because they believe it's the right thing to do." Over the following weeks, Marcus used the research station as a base of operations to reach out across the galaxy. His enhanced abilities allowed him to communicate with beings whose thought patterns were radically different from human norms, while his genuine compassion broke through barriers of suspicion and mistrust that had existed for millennia. The first major breakthrough came when he contacted the Ethereal Collective, a group of energy-based beings who existed in the space between stars. They had observed the suffering of physical species for eons, but had never intervened because they couldn't understand the emotional bonds that drove organic life. Marcus's dragon touched. Consciousness allowed him to bridge that gap. You feel their pain as if it were your own, the ethereal representative communicated, through patterns of light that Marcus could somehow interpret. This is remarkable. We had not realized that empathy could transcend species barriers so completely. It doesn't have to transcend them, Marcus replied. His thoughts translated into the ethereal's native language of pure energy. It just has to recognize that barriers are often illusions we create ourselves. The ethereals agreed to provide intelligence-gathering services, their non-physical nature, allowing them to observe events throughout the galaxy without being detected. Within days, Marcus had detailed information about every major illegal operation currently in progress. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The hive mind of Kepler 438c had been monitoring galactic communications and had noticed the unusual patterns surrounding Marcus's activities. The hive mind was composed of billions of individual insects who shared a collective consciousness, making them natural experts in cooperation and coordination. Individual who speaks for many, the hive mind addressed Marcus through their chosen representative, a six-legged creature covered in iridescent chitin. Your methods intrigue us. You create harmony from discord without destroying individual identity. This is a skill we wish to learn. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Different forms of consciousness learning from each other and finding common ground, despite radical differences in their nature. The hive mind offered to provide logistical support and coordination services, their ability to process vast amounts of information simultaneously making them ideal for managing complex rescue operations. The third ally came from within human space itself. Captain Sarah Chen of the merchant vessel Wandering Star was Marcus's own aunt, though she had no idea her nephew was still alive. When Marcus finally made contact with Earth's colonial government, the emotional reunion was broadcast across human space, galvanizing public opinion and prompting immediate action from the Terran Defense Force. My God. Marcus, Sarah whispered during their first real-time communication in months, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the changed but unmistakably familiar features of her brother's son. We thought you were dead. Your parents never stopped looking for you. I know, Aunt Sarah, Marcus replied, his voice carrying both the pain of separation and the strength he had gained from his trials. But I'm okay now, and I'm working to make sure this never happens to anyone else's family. The human response was swift and decisive. Within weeks, a joint task force had been assembled combining Terran Defense Force ships, civilian volunteers, and representatives from the new alien allies Marcus had recruited. The operation was designated Homecoming, and its mission was simple: locate and liberate every sentient being held against their will throughout the known galaxy. But Marcus knew that military action alone wouldn't solve the underlying problem. The galaxy needed a new framework for interaction between species, one based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. During long planning sessions with his diverse group of allies, he began to outline what would eventually become known as the Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights. Every being capable of suffering deserves protection, Marcus explained to the assembled representatives as they gathered in the research station's main conference room. Every being capable of growth deserves opportunity, and every being capable of choice deserves freedom. The principles seemed simple, but implementing them across a galaxy filled with thousands of different species, each with their own cultures and values, would require unprecedented cooperation. Marcus found himself becoming something he had never expected: a diplomat whose authority came not from political power, but from moral clarity. The ethereals provided evidence of illegal activities. The hive mind coordinated rescue operations with mathematical precision. The Zephyrians, motivated by their terror of dragon retribution, used their advanced technology to disable criminal facilities. Human ships provided the firepower and determination needed to face armed resistance. But it was Marcus himself who held the alliance together, his unique perspective allowing him to translate between different forms of consciousness and find solutions that satisfied everyone involved. He was no longer just a rescued child. He had become the focal point of a movement that was reshaping galactic civilization. As the first major rescue operation launched toward the Korthax Syndicate's primary facility, Marcus stood on the observation deck where he had first encountered the dragons. The stars looked different now, not like distant points of light but like destinations where beings were waiting to be freed. "Are you watching?" he whispered to the cosmos, knowing that ancient eyes were indeed still keeping track of his progress. Somewhere in the depths of space, massive forms stirred with approval. The young human was fulfilling his potential, not through conquest or domination, but through the one power that truly mattered, the ability to bring hope to those who had lost it. The assault on the Korthax Syndicate's primary facility became the stuff of legends throughout the galaxy. Marcus coordinated the operation from his command station, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to maintain simultaneous communication with dozens of different commanders across multiple species and ship types. The facility orbited a dead star in the Terminus sector, its dark location chosen specifically to avoid detection by legitimate governments. But the ethereals had mapped every sensor blind spot, while the hive mind had calculated the optimal approach vectors with mathematical perfection. Terran Strike Force Alpha, "You have a clear path to the eastern docking bays," Marcus communicated to his aunt's squadron. "Zephyrian Technical Team Beta, we need those shield generators disabled in exactly 47 seconds. Captain Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the communications array as her ships engaged the facility's automated defenses. "Roger that, Command. It's strange taking orders from my 8-year-old nephew, but you seem to know what you're doing." "Trust me, Aunt Sarah," Marcus replied, his attention split between multiple tactical displays. "The dragons taught me a few things about seeing the bigger picture." The battle was swift and decisive. The Korthax Syndicate had built their defenses to repel attacks from rival criminal organizations, not a coordinated assault by multiple species working in perfect harmony. Their weapons were designed to target conventional ships, not energy beings who could phase through solid matter or hive mind swarms that moved with impossible coordination. Within 2 hours, the facility was secured and the rescue operation began. Marcus felt his heart break as the liberation teams reported their findings. Over 3,000 beings held in conditions that violated every principle of decency he had learned. From his dragon mentors, "We found the human section," reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the facility's lower levels. 37 children and adolescents, ages ranging from 6 to 16. "They're alive, but they're going to need extensive medical and psychological care." Marcus closed his eyes and extended his enhanced senses throughout the facility, feeling the emotional resonances of every rescued being. Fear, confusion, hope, and desperate relief created a chaotic symphony that threatened to overwhelm even his strengthened consciousness. But beneath it all, he sensed something else, the beginning of healing. "Medical teams, priority evacuation for anyone showing signs of severe trauma," he ordered. "And I want counselors from every species we've rescued standing by. These beings need to see others like themselves who survived and thrived." The aftermath of the Korthax raid sent shockwaves throughout the galactic underworld. Criminal organizations that had operated with impunity for centuries suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't understand or counter. How could they fight an alliance that included beings who existed as pure energy, creatures who shared a collective consciousness, and humans who seemed to possess an unlimited capacity for righteous anger? More importantly, news of the successful rescue operation spread to the victims still held in other facilities. Marcus began receiving clandestine communications from beings who had managed to access hidden transmitters, prisoners who had learned to hack their captors' systems, and even some guards who had grown disgusted with their employers' methods. The Velteron mining operation in the Centauri cluster has over 500 beings working in conditions that amount to slavery, reported a former guard, who had contacted Marcus through encrypted channels. "I can provide floor plans and security codes, but you need to move fast. They're planning to relocate the operation after what happened to Korthax." Marcus looked up from the communication console to find Zentar standing beside him, the telepathic being's large eyes reflecting deep concern. "You're pushing yourself too hard, young friend. I can sense the strain this is placing on your consciousness." "There are too many who need help," Marcus replied, rubbing his temples where a constant headache had taken up residence. "Every day we delay, more beings suffer. And if you burn yourself out trying to save everyone at once, who will coordinate the rescue operations?" Zentar asked gently. The dragons awakened great power within you, but even enhanced humans have limits. The advice was sound, but Marcus found it difficult to accept. Every report of suffering felt like a personal failure, every delay like a betrayal of the trust the dragons had placed in him. He was beginning to understand why so many leaders throughout history had eventually broken under the weight of responsibility. It was during this moment of doubt that Marcus received an unexpected visitor. The research station's sensors detected an approaching ship that didn't match any known configuration, and the vessel's communication attempts came through on frequencies that shouldn't have existed according to conventional physics. "Permission to come aboard, young guardian," came a voice that resonated with harmonics that reminded Marcus of singing crystals and distant thunder. The airlock opened to admit a being unlike any Marcus had encountered before, tall and graceful, with features that seemed to shift between different species as he watched. The visitor carried himself with an authority that spoke of vast age and experience. "I am Keeper Thalon of the Watchers," the being announced, his voice somehow speaking every language simultaneously. "We are the record keepers of galactic civilization, observers who maintain the archives of all species and all worlds." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. He had read references to the Watchers in the most ancient Zephyrian texts, described as beings who had existed since the first civilizations achieved spaceflight. "You've been watching my operations," Marcus said, not quite making it a question. "We watch everything," Thalon confirmed. "It is our purpose, but rarely do we intervene in the affairs of younger species. However, your actions have created patterns that require our attention." The keeper gestured, and holographic displays filled the air around them, showing the ripple effects of Marcus's rescue operations across the galaxy. Criminal organizations were dissolving. Legitimate governments were implementing new protections for sentient rights, and species that had never communicated before were beginning to establish diplomatic relations. "You have accelerated the development of galactic civilization by approximately 3,000 years, Thalon observed. "The dragons chose their champion well." "I'm not trying to change history," Marcus protested. "I just want to help beings who are suffering." "And that, young one, is precisely why history is changing," Thalon replied with what might have been a smile. "Most species attempt to impose their will through force or manipulation. You succeed by appealing to the better nature that exists within all sentient life." The keeper reached into his robes and withdrew a small, crystalline device that pulsed with inner light. "The Watchers have decided to offer our assistance. This contains the locations and detailed information for every illegal operation currently active in the galaxy. We also pledge our support for your proposed Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights." Marcus accepted the crystal, feeling the vast weight of information it contained. "Why now? If you've been watching for so long, why help now?" "Because for the first time in our recorded history, we have observed a species that consistently chooses cooperation over conquest," Thalon explained. "Humanity's potential for creating bridges between different forms of consciousness may be the key to preventing the next Great Silence." "The Great Silence?" Thalon's expression grew somber. "A pattern we have observed 3 times in galactic history. When suffering and exploitation reach critical levels, the most powerful species withdraw from contact, leaving the galaxy to stagnate in isolation. Your efforts may prevent such a catastrophe from occurring again." As the keeper departed, leaving behind his gift of knowledge and support, Marcus realized that his mission had evolved beyond simple rescue operations. He was now working to reshape the fundamental relationships between species, creating a framework for cooperation that could last for millennia. The responsibility was staggering, but Marcus no longer felt alone. The alliance he had built was growing stronger each day, powered by the simple recognition that every being capable of thought and feeling deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Standing once again at his familiar observation post, Marcus watched as rescue fleets prepared to launch towards 17 different target facilities simultaneously. The galaxy was about to witness the largest coordinated liberation effort in recorded history, and at its center was a human child who had learned to see the universe through dragon eyes. The simultaneous liberation of 17 facilities across the galaxy became known as the Night of Broken Chains. Marcus coordinated the massive operation from his command center, His consciousness stretched across light years as he maintained contact with rescue teams operating in dozens of different star systems. The operation's success exceeded even his most optimistic projections. The criminal organizations, caught completely off guard by the scope and coordination of the assault, collapsed like houses built on sand. Within 12 hours, over 15,000 beings had been freed from various forms of captivity and were being transported back to their homeworlds. But victory came with unexpected complications. As news of the mass liberation spread throughout the galaxy, it triggered responses that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Some species celebrated humanity's role in the operation, viewing humans as natural leaders in the fight for sentient rights. Others grew fearful of humanity's rapidly expanding influence and began to question whether the liberators might eventually become new oppressors. The Altarian Council has formally protested our operations in their sector, reported Captain Shen during the post-operation briefing. They claim we violated their territorial sovereignty by attacking the Veltaran mining facility without their permission. Marcus studied the diplomatic reports with growing concern. The facility was built in unclaimed space and was staffed entirely by criminals. What's their real objection? They're worried about the precedent, Zentar explained, his telepathic abilities allowing him to sense the underlying emotions behind the formal protests. Many governments have been looking the other way when criminal organizations operate in their territory, sometimes in exchange for bribes or shared profits. Now they're afraid we'll expose their complicity. The political ramifications were more complex than Marcus had expected. His alliance had been so successful at liberating victims that they had inadvertently destabilized the existing power structures that had allowed such crimes to flourish in the first place. We need to address this directly, Marcus decided. If we don't establish clear principles for how liberation operations will be conducted, we'll end up fighting legitimate governments instead of criminal organizations. The solution came in the form of the Galactic Assembly, a gathering that Marcus called on the neutral world of Haven in the Centaurus sector. Representatives from over 200 species were invited to participate in drafting the formal Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights, the document that would govern interspecies relations for generations to come. Marcus stood before the assembled delegates, his small human form dwarfed by the massive chamber, but his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the great hall. At only 8 years old, he was probably the youngest being ever to address such a gathering, but his experiences had given him a perspective that transcended age. Honored delegates, he began, we gather not as conquerors or rulers, but as fellow travelers in the cosmic journey that connects all sentient life. The recent liberation operations were not acts of aggression against legitimate governments, but emergency responses to crimes that threaten the fundamental values that unite us all. The crowd stirred as his words were translated into hundreds of different languages and communication methods. Some delegates communicated through biochemical emissions, others through patterns of light or electromagnetic pulses. But Marcus's enhanced consciousness allowed him to sense that his message was reaching them, regardless of the medium. The Galactic Accord we propose today rests on 3 simple principles, Marcus continued. First, that every sentient being has the right to exist free from exploitation and abuse. Second, that no species has the authority to determine the worth or value of another species. Third, that cooperation between different forms of consciousness strengthens us all. Ambassador Velthek of the Rigel Consortium rose to speak, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. Young human, your words are inspiring, but they are also naive. The galaxy is vast and complex. Different species have different needs, different values, different ways of understanding existence itself. How can you propose universal principles when universal understanding may be impossible? Marcus had anticipated this challenge. Ambassador Velthek, may I ask you a question? Do you experience suffering? Yes, of course. And do you value your own continued existence? Naturally. Then you understand the foundation of everything I'm proposing, Marcus replied. You don't have to think like a human or live like a human to recognize that suffering is real and that existence has value. These are truths that transcend species boundaries. The debate continued for hours, with delegates raising concerns about enforcement mechanisms, territorial sovereignty, and the practical challenges of implementing such an accord across thousands of different worlds. But gradually Marcus began to see consensus emerging around the core principles he had outlined. The breakthrough came when Keeper Thalen rose to address the assembly. The ancient Watcher's presence carried such authority that the entire chamber fell silent. The Watchers have observed the rise and fall of civilizations for millions of years, Thalen announced. We have seen species achieve greatness through cooperation, and we have seen them destroy themselves through exploitation and cruelty. The principles proposed by young Marcus Chen represent the accumulated wisdom of every successful civilization we have ever recorded. The endorsement from the Watchers shifted the entire dynamic of the negotiations. If beings who had witnessed the entire history of galactic civilization supported the accord, few delegates were willing to stand in opposition. But Marcus's greatest challenge came from an unexpected source: his own success. As the accord moved toward final approval, he began receiving communications from beings throughout the galaxy who saw him as a messianic figure, someone who could solve all of their problems and right every injustice. Marcus the Liberator, they called him. The Dragon-Touched Guardian. The Bridge Builder. The titles made him deeply uncomfortable, because he understood the danger they represented. The moment I start believing I'm special because of what I can do, I'll stop being able to do it, he confided to Zentar during a rare quiet moment. The dragons didn't choose me because I was better than anyone else. They chose me because I was willing to see others as worthy of respect and protection. Wisdom beyond your years, Zentar observed. But how will you handle the expectations that others are placing on you? Marcus looked out at the stars visible through the assembly chamber's great window, each point of light representing worlds where beings were living their lives with dreams and fears and hopes just like his own. By remembering that I'm not the hero of this story, he said finally, every being who chooses cooperation over exploitation, every person who stands up for someone weaker than themselves, every individual who refuses to let suffering continue when they have the power to stop it. They're all heroes. I'm just the one who happened to get touched by dragons. The final vote on the Galactic Accord for Sentient Rights was unanimous, an unprecedented achievement in the history of interspecies diplomacy. But Marcus knew that signing the document was only the beginning. The real work would come in implementing its principles across a galaxy where old habits and ancient prejudices died hard. As the assembly concluded and delegates began returning to their homeworlds, Marcus received a private communication that made his heart race with excitement. It was from his parents on New Terra Colony, the first direct contact he had had with them since his capture. Marcus, his mother's voice was filled with tears and joy and disbelief. Son, is it really you? It's me, Mom, Marcus replied, his own voice breaking with emotion. I'm coming home soon. I have so much to tell you. The reunion would have to wait, however. Even as he spoke with his parents, urgent reports were coming in about new criminal organizations that were forming in response to the Accord's passage. The work of liberation was far from over, and the galaxy still needed its bridge builder. But for the first time since the dragons had awakened his potential, Marcus felt truly hopeful about the future. The foundations had been laid for a new kind of galactic civilization, one built on respect and cooperation rather than fear and exploitation. The real adventure was just beginning. 5 years had passed since the signing of the Galactic Accord, and Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Harmony Station, watching ships from dozens of different species dock at the massive orbital facility. At 13, he had grown taller and his voice had begun to change. But the dragon-touched wisdom in his eyes remained constant. Harmony Station had become the symbol of the new galactic order, a place where representatives from different worlds could meet on neutral ground to resolve disputes and coordinate humanitarian efforts. It was built not by any single species, but through the combined efforts of the entire galactic community, with each member contributing their unique strengths to the project. The latest reports from the Outer Rim are encouraging, Zentar reported, joining Marcus at the viewing port. The blue-skinned telepath had become Marcus's closest advisor and friend over the years. The last known pirate stronghold in the Vega sector has been dismantled, and the rescued beings are being processed for repatriation. Marcus nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Each successful operation meant freedom for those who had been enslaved, but it also revealed the true scope of suffering that had existed throughout the galaxy. Even after 5 years of constant work, New cases of exploitation were still being discovered. What about the Kronos Rebellion? Marcus asked, referring to a recent crisis where a technologically advanced species had attempted to secede from the Accord and resume their old practices of enslaving less developed worlds. Resolved peacefully, Zentar replied with satisfaction. The economic sanctions you suggested were effective. When the Kronos leadership realized that isolation from the galactic community would cost them more than compliance with the Accord, they agreed to negotiations. The success of the Kronos situation demonstrated how much the galaxy had changed. Instead of responding to the crisis with military force, the Accord Council had implemented economic and diplomatic pressure that made exploitation less profitable than cooperation. It was exactly the kind of solution that Marcus had hoped for when the principles were first drafted. Marcus, came a familiar voice from behind them. Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen and commander of the Terran Defense Force's Humanitarian Operations Division, approached with a data pad in her hand. We've received an interesting communication from Earth. The Colonial Council wants to offer you a formal position as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Accord Council. Marcus turned away from the window, considering the implications. An official position would give him greater authority to coordinate rescue operations and diplomatic initiatives, but it would also make him a political figure in ways that might compromise his effectiveness. What do you think, Aunt Sarah? He asked. I think you've been doing the job already just without the title, she replied with a smile. But I also think you should talk to your parents before making any major decisions. They're arriving on the next transport. Marcus felt his heart leap. He had maintained regular communication with his family throughout the years, but his responsibilities had prevented him from visiting New Terra Colony. The thought of seeing them again filled him with joy and nervousness in equal measure. The reunion took place in Harmony Station's civilian quarters, and Marcus was struck by how much his parents had aged during their separation. The stress of not knowing whether their son was alive, followed by the gradual realization of what he had become, had taken its toll. You've grown so much, his mother whispered as she held him close. I can barely recognize the little boy we lost. I'm still me, Mom, Marcus assured her. Just maybe a little different than you expected. His father studied him with the analytical eye of a man who had spent years farming the challenging soil of a frontier world. The reports we've been receiving about your activities, they're true? You're really coordinating operations across the entire galaxy? Marcus nodded. With help from a lot of friends. I couldn't do any of it alone. The dragons, his mother said quietly. They really came for you? They came because I needed them, Marcus replied. But I think they also came because humanity needed to learn something about our place in the universe. We're not the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced, but we have something that many others lack. What's that? His father asked. The ability to see past differences and find common ground, Marcus explained. The dragons recognized that potential in our species, and they chose to help us develop it. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the station's command center. Keeper Thalen's voice echoed through the room with uncharacteristic urgency. Marcus, please report to the council chambers immediately. We have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Marcus exchanged glances with his parents, seeing both worry and pride in their eyes. Duty calls, he said with a wry smile. But this time you can come with me if you want to see what I actually do. The council chambers were filled with representatives from the major species of the Accord. All of them focused on a massive holographic display showing the Andromeda galaxy. Marcus felt a chill as he recognized the implications of what he was seeing. Explain the situation, he requested as he took his place at the center of the chamber. Ambassador, Velthek of the Rigel Consortium gestured to the display. Our long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures coming from Andromeda. The patterns are consistent with dragon activity, but on a scale we've never observed before. More concerning, added Commander Thekvol, who had become an unlikely ally over the years. We've also detected what appear to be distress signals from multiple civilizations in that galaxy. Someone or something is causing widespread destruction. Marcus studied the data, his enhanced consciousness processing the patterns and implications faster than conventional analysis could provide. What he saw filled him with both dread and determination. It's a test, he realized. The dragons who helped me were from this galaxy, but there are others in Andromeda who are facing something that threatens their existence. "They're calling for help. Help from whom?" asked his mother, who had followed him to the council chambers despite the unprecedented nature of a civilian being present during such deliberations. Marcus looked around the chamber at the representatives of dozens of species who had learned to work together, despite their differences, who had created a framework for cooperation that was already spreading to other regions of their own galaxy. "From us," he said simply. "From everyone who has learned that the strongest response to chaos is unity." The chamber erupted in discussion as the implications sank in. The Galactic Accord had spent 5 years learning to work together within their own galaxy. Now they were being called upon to extend that cooperation across the vast emptiness between galaxies. To help beings they had never met face dangers they couldn't yet understand. "The risks are enormous," pointed out the ethereal representative. "Intergalactic travel is still theoretical for most of our species. The energy requirements alone are manageable if we pool our resources," Marcus interrupted, his mind already working on the logistics. "The ethereals can provide navigation through the void between galaxies. The hive mind can coordinate the massive computational requirements. The dragons can provide the initial energy boost needed to reach escape velocity from our galaxy's gravitational field." "And humanity?" asked Keeper Thalon. Marcus looked at his parents, seeing in their faces the same determination that had driven humans to spread across their own galaxy, despite the dangers and challenges they faced. "Humanity will do what we've always done," he replied. "We'll build bridges between different forms of consciousness and help everyone work together toward a common goal." As the council began planning for the most ambitious rescue operation in galactic history, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of dragon presence at the edge of his consciousness. The ancient beings who had first awakened his potential were watching, waiting to see if the lessons they had taught would extend beyond the boundaries of a single galaxy. The boy who had been abandoned on a research station had become something unprecedented. A coordinator of civilizations, a bridge between species, a living symbol of the potential that existed when beings chose cooperation over conflict. But most importantly, he was still Marcus Chen, a human child who refused to let suffering continue when he had the power to help stop it. And now, that power was about to be tested on a scale that would determine the fate of 2 entire galaxies. The real adventure was just beginning, and for the first time since his ordeal had started, Marcus was no longer facing it alone. He had his family, his friends from across the galaxy, and the growing recognition that humanity's greatest strength was not in what they could accomplish individually, but in what they could inspire others to accomplish together. The stars of Andromeda beckoned, and the united civilizations of the Milky Way prepared to answer their call.